So I'm pretty sure if you've been online for the past couple of years, you've seen the topic of media illiteracy come up.
Media literacy.
Media literacy.
Media literacy.
Media literacy.
Media literacy.
Media literacy refers to as one's inability to recognize the narrative or messages of a piece of art. Probably the most infamous example of a media illiteracy is the argument that Shrek is a cautionary tale.
I just posted on my Instagram story about how Shrek is not a fairy tale. It's a cautionary tale.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
This was a conversation on TikTok brought up around the idea that a man will always make a woman worse, but never improve himself to be a better person. A strange bastardization of the themes and morals of Shrek, which is simply a story about inner beauty. But this isn't a recent phenomenon, as it's existed for decades. A lot of people might remember Bruce Springsteen's song Born in the USA, a song about ironic American patriotism focused around US veterans who were thrown away by their government after fighting in the Vietnam War. This song was used by Ronald Reagan in his re-election campaign, much to the artistic dismay of Bruce Springsteen. To quote the infamous Andre 3000, "Y'all don't want to hear me, you just want to dance." However, there's a new issue on the rise, one just as nefarious and harmful as media illiteracy, because unlike media illiteracy, this is done completely intentionally by its viewer. This is a phenomenon I refer to as media immaturity. Media immaturity is the deliberate misrepresentation of themes, ideas, or events in a piece of art because an audience member refuses to engage on its subject matter. This is usually due to outward personal biases that affects the way they view art. A lot of you may be curious as to what I mean, because I think a lot of us are guilty of this exact train of thought. So let me give you the example that got me thinking about this entire thing. Let's talk about Deltarune. After Chapter 1 of Deltarune, the game splits into two paths. The normal route and the weird route. Most players would be playing the normal route, as in order to play the weird route, you would need to come across some very specific criteria. The weird route effectively means you as a player taking every bad choice you could possibly make. It starts in Chapter 2, where you use Noelle's trust in Chris to have her kill everything in her path. This culminates in the use of the Thorn Ring, which strips away her autonomy, as you force her to kill Birdley. Well, presumably kill him. The trauma of this carries on to Chapter 4, where despite the fact that Noelle thinks everything that happened was just a dream, she still hears the voice of us, the player, in her head. She confines herself into Chris, in the privacy of her room, separated pretty far on either ends of her couch. She reflects on their friendship, happy that they get to spend this time together. She slowly moves closer and closer to Chris, really opening up her feelings towards them. She closes her eyes and leans in as the two are now rubbing shoulders to one another. This is when Chris grabs her hand. Chris can barely hold on to themselves at that point. This is when we take over Chris's body again and reveal ourselves to Noelle. She hears the voice that she heard during Chapter 2 and is mortified. Noelle shuffles to the other side of the couch, wanting to de-escalate the situation, but we force Chris to crawl closer and closer to her. She realizes this was all real, everything, and she needs to get away. Now. She begs and pleads for Chris to snap out of it, but nothing is stopping them. Chris presents the Ring of Thorns. She knows what this means. Terrified, she begs Chris to stop, over and over and over again. But every time we just choose to proceed. Every beg for our mercy is met with another option to proceed. We kept going and going and going, despite her fears, despite her protests, despite every time she says no, we just proceed. Then we put the ring on her finger. All we see is a graphic of a wilting flower.
And everyone looked away, as I believed them.
So, I want to ask, how does that scene read to you? Based on your personal and social context, what information or ideas is this scene invoking? If you're like most people, you're probably going to feel as if this scene is metaphorically representing sexual assault. It's pretty heavy. The intimate scene, compounded by Noelle's consent being taken away from her, it feels truly violating to watch. The wilting flower, metaphorically representing the idea of Noelle being deflowered, is gut-wrenching. Even if that is not the literal text of what is happening, it is meant to invoke the same emotions. It is the ultimate mirror Toby Fox is holding up to its audience, and I've never seen a game do it with such grace. Unfortunately, the fans didn't see it that way. When Chapter 4 first dropped and fans got to the weird route, people freaked the fuck out. And that's because some people looked at the metaphor and thought that it was the literal text of the scene. The backlash was so wide that Toby Fox had to go back and censor the wilting flower graphic, effectively lessening the impact of the metaphor. And so now people are taking it to the opposite extreme, where the couch scene wasn't a metaphorical representation of sexual assault at all, because art isn't supposed to make me feel uncomfortable. Art is a consumer product that I bought. Therefore, a consumer product should only make me feel good. This is the issue. The reason why people are acting this way is because we have come to expect the idea that buying something means an exchange of comfort, and not a means of supporting art that you want to engage with. This perspective, this very dismissive perspective, is so inherently anti-art, and I'm so disappointed that Toby Fox went back and lessened the impact of his work. I understand that the topics at hand are very heavy and traumatizing, and I understand if you do not want to play this part of the route. That's completely acceptable, and I totally get it. I don't want to undermine people's actual feelings. A part of Undertale and Deltarune is the choices you make, whether you choose to or not to engage. A huge part of the game is to make a distinction between the player and the character in order to critique the completionist mindset, by forcing the character into doing things they otherwise wouldn't want to. I just can't imagine a situation in which somebody would play this part of the route, be given every opportunity to opt out, and simply choose to keep going much to their anger and dismay. Or see the scene and the choices they did not choose to make, and make it some commentary on the moral failings on Toby Fox, as if this is trivializing the weight of sexual assault. That is a pretty reductive way of looking at art. It is an immature way of looking at art, because art isn't always meant to make us feel happy or the most comfortable emotions possible. Art in many ways is a social science. What events or images can an artist concoct in order to draw specific emotions out of its audience, not for the sake of shock value, but to ask its audience to look internally and reevaluate the relationship with video games? I feel as if a line would be crossed if this scene was indulgent. Take The Coffin of Andy and Lele, for example, a game that is particularly controversial due to the incestuous relationship options between the two titular siblings. A lot of fans would defend this decision because it is optional, however, that option is indulgent and is completely to the player's gaze. It's not really particularly critical of it if it seems to be relatively celebratory in the idea you get that option, where instead Deltarune is making a direct criticism of the player's actions. But because we live in a world where people are concerned about the media they consume being problematic or not, as if an appreciation for art is a complete reflection of your own moral values, we're coming into an era of increasingly sanitized art with challenging or hard ideas becoming less and less talked about. Sometimes these artistic expressions are a way for us to process these ideas, so art in many ways is a critical part of our social connections. Deltarune isn't the only victim of media immaturity, as a much more recent example that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with is the Amazing Digital Circus Episode 9. Spoilers, by the way. The series focuses around two protagonists, Pomni and Jax. Pomni is a static character, meaning her ideals or person doesn't change but is instead challenged throughout the narrative, whilst Jax is a dynamic character, which means where he starts at the beginning of the series is not going to be at the same place where he is at the end of the series, which also means that Jax gets far more development than the rest of the cast. A lot of fans really don't like this, considering how divisive a character Jax is. He doesn't have a single redeeming quality and is pretty morally irreprehensible all the way up to the very end of the series. From misogyny to physical and mental abuse, Jax has done everything in his power to make life hell for the other members of the circus. Circus. Jax, being a character that has significant focus and development, has gained the accusations of the show itself perpetuating misogynistic ideas by enabling abusive behaviors by men as just being misunderstood, as by the end of the series, Jax abstracts, which is effectively this show's version of death, and in the last moments we have of Jax, we get a more empathetic view on his life and decisions. A lot of people accuse this as being a clumsy attempt at redemption, when in actuality, redemption requires a positive change. Jax only got worse throughout the entire series, because the point of Jax is to be a cautionary tale. We see how everyone else is able to lead better lives and be happy in the circus, whilst Jax continuously pushes away the people he loves, especially when we're let in on the information of Jax's gender dysphoria, meaning they never got the chance to explore or express their true self. Jax is a character we are meant to feel bad for, at the same time we're supposed to recognize everything that happened to them is entirely their own machination. The characters feel bad for Jax even if they don't inherently forgive them, because their fate is so disproportionate to who they were as a person, as well as the fact that like all of them, they were victims of the circus. But people refuse to look at it that way, especially when it comes to Jax's gender identity. You see, Jax's misogyny is an intentional flaw of his character, due to his struggles with his own gender identity. People saw a bad character doing bad things and think that the show itself is trying to morally agree with Jax's bad actions. However, some people already made up their mind. The Amazing Digital Circus is problematic media, so even if they are fundamentally incorrect, they are too immature to acknowledge the fact they are wrong, and choose to continuously misrepresent the ideas or messages of the series. And when the text stopped supporting their agenda, they began looking outwardly. Well, surely the true problematic stuff has to be found in the creator, Gooseworks. They were taking ironic, sarcastic jokes she was making as clear proof of her being a misogynist. Like, these statements are so obtuse, there is no way anybody could take this seriously. They took the bait, saw the switch, but refused to acknowledge they've been had, because God forbid people can just be wrong sometimes. This is only a drop in the bucket with the myriad of other controversies surrounding the Amazing Digital Circus. Maybe I'll make it its own video in the future, but for now I wanted to cut it off right there before I go off on any longer of a tangent. Now, don't get it confused, there is such thing as morally irreprehensible art. I mentioned before the Coffin of Andy and Lele, but they all vary in severity. Hazbin Hotel is on the lower end of the spectrum, as at worst it is just extremely flippant with its heavy ideas, not knowing if it wants to be a drama or a black comedy, and so it undermines any sincerity it has, at one moment taking these subjects of rape and assault seriously, and then at the very next have a character get raped off screen as a joke. Whilst on the other end of the spectrum, there is Birth of a Nation, with its messages helping popularize the Ku Klux Klan, as well as normalize the prejudice against African Americans as being dangerous to white culture. But a lot of people aren't able to fully recognize when a work of art crosses that line, because when we have negative emotions, a lot of people act on instinct. They don't ask why they feel this way, they just think that the existence of negative emotions means that something has gone wrong. Thusly, we land the fault on the work of art, the thing that drew these emotions out of us. So we might end up misplacing our emotions. One might watch The Birth of a Nation and feel the exact same way they do watching American History X. They see a white person brutalize African Americans and not recognize that one is a critique of white supremacy whilst the other is white supremacist propaganda. I think a huge part as to why we have this issue is the fact that we categorize art as entertainment.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah, I fucking love Star Wars!
Which I sometimes think is the worst possible way of describing something someone put so much time and passion into, because it implies that it exists to serve us, and so many of us refuse to engage with it on any meaningful level. This especially comes with the rise of media that tells you to turn your brain off. This is the final form of media immaturity, as it's effectively telling you to not think, just consume. That's why we have all these shows and movies now on streaming services that are tailored for people to be scrolling on their phone while they're watching, because we can't trust audiences to be able to think for themselves anymore. If things aren't explicitly told to us, then how are we supposed to know how to feel? That's why I think media immaturity is way more dangerous than media illiteracy, because it is fundamentally forcing the removal of nuance in artwork. If it's not tailored for someone's comfort or immediate understanding, then that work of art is dismissed as bad product, because that's what it all becomes at the end of the day, product. We treat works of art with the same attitude we do AI slop, which is ironic considering considering a lot of these people are trying to talk about being pro-artist, but that doesn't mean an artist is going to be pandering to the joy of an audience. The best way to combat this is to look at a work of art, recognize the emotions we're feeling, and simply ask ourselves, why? Why do we feel this way? What parts of the work of art elicit these emotions? And is it intentional or unintentional? And what biases or past life experiences could I be bringing with me? Because what that does is legitimize art. Regardless on if you like it or not, it is the best possible thing you can give an artist. There is such thing as bad faith criticism, and a lot of that really stems from one's own immaturity. And I think it's important that as we get older, we keep that in check, as art is an extension of the human experience. Because artists aren't mechanisms, they are people. I hope people walk away from this video and engage in art that makes it feel uncomfortable, within their boundaries of course. I don't think anyone should be forced to engage in something that they don't feel prepared to handle. Content warnings exist for a reason, and I'm not going to hold it against people who just say no. Anyway, that is all I really have to say. I'm not a professional by any means, I am definitely a pseudo-intellectual. This has just been something that has been eating me up, and this is my own perspective. If you have any opposing viewpoints, then I would love to hear it, but that's all the time I have for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been May, and I'll see you next time.